This programme will be examining many cases where angels have appeared to ordinary people, bestowing peace and spiritual understanding. You will hear many testify to God's love being administered through his angels. Not always appearing with wings, angels are often witnessed in human form as they save lives before suddenly disappearing. As Hebrews points out, you have entertained angels unawares.
Well, angels come to meet a human need. They also come to raise faith. They come to as messengers of God's will, audibly. We see this at the resurrection when angels told the disciples to go and to meet our Lord in Galilee. They herald a new beginning when the angels came at the birth of Jesus. So they have many functions.
Well, angels came into my life quite by accident. I did actually have an experience which at the time I couldn't relate to angels, but in retrospect was an angelic experience. Being with a very close friend one evening, we were suddenly very aware of a tingling sensation which went from the tops of my head right down to my toes. We've been talking about love and the importance of love in people's lives and how children could grow up damaged without love. And my friend said to me instantly, "Can you feel this sensation? There's something happening in this room." And there was a very strong feeling of a presence. And then a very, very bright light appeared. It didn't hurt the eyes, but it filled the whole room. And it was almost as if somebody was underlining what we were saying. Yes, you've got it right, love is the most important thing.
It's important when we think of angels to realise that they're only messengers, that they're only part of God's creation, and that they are not God. God is Trinity, Father, the Son, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit, his God's Spirit who he sent to be within us if we believe in him. And angels are far lower down the scale than that. They're only messengers. And when we get to heaven, Hebrews says that we, the redeemed, those who've been saved by believing in Jesus, will be higher than the angels. That's an amazing thought. And so we must keep angels in perspective. They're wonderful, and it's a great privilege for somebody to see them. But they're only messengers, and it's God we must worship. We must never worship the angels. We shouldn't pray directly to the angels. We can pray to God to send angels if we would like him to, but he may choose to or he may not. It's up to him. But we shouldn't ever worship them or pray directly to them.
It was during a normal worship rehearsal that members of Holy Apostles Parish Church in Leicester first heard angels singing. Initially stunned by the angelic presence, the experience has continued, perhaps in recognition of the human praise itself.
Well, the first that I knew about this was one evening coming back late from a meeting somewhere else. I got back into the vicarage to find a lot of talking going on, quite excited talking, and found Peter and Trevor there with my wife Julie. And they related to me a story about how they'd been rehearsing as they ordinarily would on a Tuesday evening, but that late in the evening they had become aware of voices singing along with them, of people who just were not there.
I remember that first night when we ran across to the vicarage to tell John Rayner what we'd experienced, or at least what we thought we'd experienced.
We're actually playing the song "I'm Standing in Your Presence," and it's a song that I've actually written myself. And Trevor and I were just playing, and suddenly we heard these other voices.
John, our vicar, believes us. He hasn't actually heard them. But I think we got enough credibility for him to believe us and know that it's happening here.
They told me that they wondered whether this was angelic voices singing along with them, and I believed them because a number of years ago, about 20 years ago, I had heard a similar kind of experience told me by the wife of a Pentecostal pastor. And I hadn't shared this story with anyone really in all of that time. But what Peter and Trevor were describing to me was precisely the same phenomenon.
I believe it's affirmation of our worship to God, that they are so pleased that us as almost mere humans, mere mortals, are worshipping God to the best of our ability, that they want to join with us, because at the end of the day, that is what is happening in heaven. There is worship. And maybe it's a glimpse of heaven here on earth, of what worship to God is like.
This harmonious confirmation provides us with further proof that angels are among us. The Bible tells us that by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities. All things were created by him and for him. Certainly this type of angel encounter appears to be happening in other churches, many believing it to be the forerunner to a greater outpouring of God's Spirit here on earth. Whatever the reason, it clearly underlines the existence of angels and draws us nearer towards understanding the character of God.
My first reaction was that Shirley was still there and singing, but then I realised that she'd gone home. I'd seen her walk out of the door, so it couldn't possibly be her. Then I thought, well, I'm hearing things, I won't say anything, and sort of just, I had an ear on it, but that was all.
The next day after they heard the angels in here, I got a telephone call from Trevor to say that he'd heard angels in the church, and they thought they were going mad, and actually they thought it was me singing. And the fact that I'd left the church prior to that made it even more interesting. And so we began to think immediately that we got angels here.
We couldn't believe it to start with. We couldn't believe that we weren't just hearing things, that there were actually extra voices in there. So we started, look, there must be a technical reason for that. It must be the instruments we're playing. Trevor's mandolin, sometimes the notes you play can sound very much like voices. So we got him to stop playing. They were still there. I changed my style of playing. The voices were still there that we heard.
We're obviously doing something right, but I just can't wait to see what's going to happen next.
Well, the character of angels, in a sense, is also the character of God, in that they belong to God. They were there at the beginning of creation, and they were active at creation and also active in worship. When we reach heaven, we will be surrounded by myriads of angels who will be worshipping him. And again, to listen to angels singing, which was our privilege through a tape that we heard, and from those who have witnessed to us, such a tremendous sound.
We were in the States, Robbie Broniman and myself and the band 65 dBA, and we were touring over in the States. And during our time there, we went into a couple of clubs. And we noticed that there was a huge interest in spiritual things. It seemed as if the whole kind of materialistic thing and had crumbled to a certain extent, and people were interested in finding out more. People were saying things like, they were looking for experiences and divine experiences, and many of them trying it through drugs and other kind of things, but trying to find something more than what they had. And so we thought, it'd be really good when we got back to England to see if we could produce an album that carried something of our Christian faith on it, so that when it was released into the clubs, people could find something real in terms of experiencing something of the Christian faith. And so we spent quite a few months in the studio putting down music that was not only very club friendly, but also had a spiritual dimension to it. One of them, there's a little small track on it that's called Saligna, which, if you're clever and say it backwards, it makes angelic. And that is a track that we found on a cassette, and supposedly of angels singing. And so we took that, we put it into our sampler, and then we just put it onto the disc, and it's caused quite a reaction where people have heard it. Even before we cleaned it up, I have to tell you, the very first time I heard it, it just made me feel, wow, there's something special about this. And then when you cleaned it up and heard it, it was so clear that there was this huge, it just sounds like a huge choir singing all sorts of harmonies. And yet, the story is that it was just a small group of people, of young people, in this large building in Canada. And they were playing, I think, with an acoustic guitar. And they had a little recorder, that's why the recording's so bad, they had a little tape recorder where they just recorded themselves singing. And when they played it back, instead of them singing, was this just huge, like, choir singing, this praise and worship. And so it's quite awesome, really, to listen to it.
One of the loveliest verses in the Bible is of the angel's protection for us, and that's in Psalm 91, verses 9 to 11. If you make the Most High your dwelling, even the Lord, who is my refuge, then no harm will befall you, no disaster will come near your tent, for he will command his angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways. They will lift you up in their hands, so that you will not strike your foot against a stone.
One particular day I was feeling particularly low. This was going probably a year, 18 months after my husband died. Doing general type of housework, and I was mopping the kitchen floor when I felt felt like someone had touched my shoulder, and when I looked around, certainly I did feel that I would have seen someone, but there was no one there. I turned around and I expected someone to be there, and I was very surprised that they weren't. I have 3 children. I did tell them about this particular experience. They looked at me and smiled and thought it was incredible. My little boy, Jonathan, he's 7 now, but he had an experience when he was 5. It was within maybe 4 or 5 weeks of his daddy dying, that the class in school were going out to a theme park. They went to Gulliver's World for the day. He was in one of the main attractions, and
he said that he saw his daddy. Of course, I questioned him on what exactly he had seen when he came home, and he said that he saw his daddy dressed in blue. And I asked what happened then, and he said, well, he came over and he put his arms around me. I could see him, but I couldn't feel him. And I thought that was extraordinary for a child. You know, he was so young, he was just 5 years of age.
My experience of this angel encounter came when my mother was very ill and we thought that she was going to die. I remember this small bedroom and I was sitting there with her and I started to pray. Whilst I was praying, I became aware of two, very much like you would see in the biblical idea of angels, which I'd never thought of angels in quite that way, but there were two enormous wings of light and they seemed to fill the whole of the bedroom. So the whole room lit up with light and they were very definite angels' wings. And I knew that there was some celestial being with us. And just at that moment, my mother opened her eyes and she said, I think I'm going to get better, Mavis. And I said, oh yes, I'm sure you are. And we both started to cry. It was a very moving experience, very sacred experience.
The most common experience that people have when they see an angel or hear angels is that they feel an incredible sense of peace, an overwhelming peace. It's a peace that is hard to describe. The Bible calls it a peace that passes understanding. It's a tangible peace. It seems to fill the whole room. And everybody who's told me of angel experiences have described this wonderful peace. And the other thing which stands out is that there's no doubt in their minds that they've seen an angel. They hadn't expected it, they hadn't asked for it, and yet they're certain that that's what they've seen, a messenger from God.
When the worship team at St Mary's in Great Baddow decided to organise a prom night, they could hardly have anticipated the appearance of angels. However, as the evening progressed, 2 winged angels were sighted from opposite ends of the church.
During the evening, we sang many pieces from the Messiah, which was good, and we enjoyed it. As we came towards the end, one lady had sung, I know that my Redeemer liveth, and then we went in to sing the Hallelujah chorus, and it was that chorus that was especially significant that night, because as we started to sing it, I became aware more within myself too that there was something very special going on here. There was a stirring going on within myself, and it was like the passion of the song, but also the glory of God just seemed to be coming into the whole situation, and it was something quite incredible really. And I wasn't thinking of anything in particular at the time, but I looked up and saw 2 angels. I don't recollect any tremendous bright light. Some people talk about a piercing white light. There wasn't that. The angels looked more like a traditional sort of angel that people might expect to see, rather than a warrior dressed type person. They were winged and quite large, but not excessively large. When we were singing in the prom, we were all sat at the east end, the altar end of the church. So I was looking out in front of me down to the west side. So these angels were, well, they were sort of in the middle of the church really, right in the middle, up high. It seems a shame in a way that more people didn't see these angels. And I guess I thought it was natural that people should see angels. They're a part of God's creation. God created the angels. But it's something that has never left me. Okay, I can't quite feel like I did on the night of that prom, but that experience and what it meant to me for my faith has never left me since then.
About 4 or 5 years ago, I had to go into hospital for an operation, and the operation was for a sterilisation, and I had a few problems with it, not purely physical, but because I'm a Christian, there were a few moral problems as well, but I decided that I had to have this operation done. And on the morning after the operation, my husband was on his way to work, and he picked me up from the hospital first and dropped me off at home. And the house was empty, the children were all out, my husband went back to work, and I just lay on the settee in the living room. And as I lay there, I felt very tired and very weak. And as I lay there, I became aware of a figure. I felt that the angel came at a time when I was very low physically, emotionally, spiritually. And the timing was just right. I just needed to feel that presence at that time.
Kate's story, following on from her experience, is an added experience and an amazing coincidence too. Since giving me her story for the book, she's discovered this photograph of an angel that a friend of hers actually took from an aircraft. It was phenomenal in that there was a terrible storm, that this person was very, very anxious and worried and felt sure that the aircraft was going to crash. She felt sure she was going to die, but was still fascinated by the colours in the sky and the tremendous storm outside. So she did take a photograph, and afterwards thought that the only thing she could do was to pray. But having had the film developed, discovered a wonderful angel on the photograph that she'd taken through the plane window. So her prayers and her vows to the angel to help had come true for her. And it's just an amazing photograph.
I'm often asked about guardian angels. Guardian angels aren't specifically mentioned in the Bible, but they've been part of Catholic teaching throughout the centuries. And the understanding is that we each have a guardian angel with us throughout our life. But the Bible, it actually says that angels are in heaven most of the time and they are worshipping God. And Matthew says that Jesus says these little children, their angels, are seeing the face of God. So that shows that they are in heaven most of the time. But if we need an angel to rescue us or protect us or whatever, then an angel appears and does that job. If we need 20 angels, if we need 100 angels, that's how many appear. We're not limited to one, and we're not limited to that one throughout our life.
Not many people can illustrate their angel encounter. However, artist Jean Jale has used her painting skills to produce an impressive collection of angelic images, offering a glimpse of what happens when angels appear.
I was living on a narrowboat in Oxford. It must have been summer, because one day I remember waking and lying there looking at the ripples of sunlight that had been reflected on the water, and I was watching this beautiful play on the ceiling and the walls of the boat, because the next moment I was very shocked to experience a hand covering mine, a solid hand. I couldn't tell the difference between her hand and a friend's hand, anyone's hand placed over mine. And her hand was slightly cooler than mine. That lasted for, I would imagine, about 2 seconds. And then suddenly all the feeling of the hand went and all the feeling of her presence was gone. And then I was flooded with wonderful feelings of reassurance that there was somebody looking after me. I wasn't alone. I have no doubt that this was an angel. She brought me a great inner strength and peacefulness, and the realisation that such beings do exist. This was a wonderful experience.
good and bad angels are fighting each other for the purpose of promoting God's work in the world. And sometimes there is a battle going on in the heavenlies, but obviously we only know about the part that affects us. Fallen angels are some of those who were created as angels at the beginning of time, as was Lucifer, who we know as Satan. And he was one of the angels on a par with the Archangel Michael. And he rebelled against God. We're told in Daniel he fell and he took a third of heaven's angels with him.
Yes, I hadn't been a Christian very long, and I had quite a frightening experience, really. And I haven't talked about it very much because I didn't want people to think that this was the norm for becoming a Christian. But what happened was, I'd been brought up by a religious cult that had taught me that Jesus wasn't God, there was no Trinity, Satan didn't exist, the Holy Spirit wasn't a person. And they were the main things they taught me. And I'd only been a Christian 6 weeks, and suddenly, standing at the bottom of my bed, was Satan. I don't know how I knew it was Satan. And he had the same outfit on that I'd seen the other angels wearing. Exactly the same. He got his sword, he had his straps crossed like that in his belt. But the difference was I could smell on him fire. I could smell smoke on him. And he walked around me. I was lying in bed, but somehow he stalked me and said, "I want you." And I was just terrified. I thought I must have done something wrong, that in some way I'd let God down. I didn't know what had happened because I was a new Christian. I didn't know anything about Satan, the enemy, or anything. So I just didn't know what had happened, and I was very frightened. And I went into the bathroom and I just really prayed and said, "What have I done?" And the next morning, and I got up, I called the elder's wife, and she came to see me, and she explained to me that Satan really does exist, that he is real, that he's a fallen angel and everything about that. And then she prayed for me to receive the gift of speaking in tongues. Now, I think I already had the gift but wasn't fully aware that I'd got this gift. But when she started to pray in tongues, I knew instantly that that was already within me, that I'd got this from God. And I was fine after that. But I think God allowed it to happen because I needed to understand that there is an enemy, that we are going to have battles at times, that he is going to make life difficult for us. And I needed to know that.
Roy never actually saw angels, but towards the end of his life, when he was very, very ill and quite weak, he did hear angels, and he said it was an angelic choir and they were singing most beautifully. He said it was just the most wonderful sound. They were singing, "Because he lives, I can face tomorrow." And if you know the verses of that hymn, it was very appropriate for the occasion. So he also saw lights, beautiful lights. He said they were bright and amazing and nothing like anything he'd ever seen on earth. And he saw those several times. And then he also saw himself in a garden. And again he said it was impossible to describe because it was more beautiful than any garden he'd ever been in. And he actually said, "I thought I was a gardener, but this gardener's something else." And he was a really good gardener, very keen. So obviously what he saw was brilliant.
Yes, I've got quite a few favourites. I think the one that stands out for me is the angel that came as a plumber and met a very human need. To find a plumber at any time is a miracle, let alone on a Sunday, I believe, when this one arrived. And to be able to have met a need like that and then completely to disappear was such an overwhelming experience for that lady who actually prayed that someone would come and help. And yes, here we see again that God is ready to answer prayers, and sometimes in almost a direct way. in this case with a plumber arriving at the doorstep.
Many times angels take on human form because that's what we recognise and that's what's obvious to the eye. Sometimes angels appear in traditional kind of clothing, long flowing robes, white wings, sometimes carrying dazzling swords, and sometimes they appear looking in ordinary clothes like we would today. But when they vanish before your eyes, that's how you knew that they didn't have an address to go back home to.
One remarkable sighting of an angel which came in human form took place at Lee Abbey on the North Devonshire coast. Ray and Pam Farden, with many others, witnessed a runaway tractor as it threatened the lives of all in its path. Everyone who was there that day has little doubt that it was an angel that steered the tractor to safety.
It was the summer of '69. And a warm, well, very hot summer's day, really. And we were down in the camp waiting for lunch. And up here at Lee Abbey, there were crowds of people sitting on the seats, enjoying the sun. And, well, everywhere there seemed to be people. I remember it so vividly. We were just getting ready for lunch. And the kitchen team were all rushing around with their great big pots. And the campers were keeping out of the way, just really sunbathing. Noises everywhere, but over all this noise of activity before lunch came this roaring sound that sounded like a low-flying aircraft. But of course we suddenly realized it was a tractor.
I looked up and at this tremendous sound, a tractor going at about 50 miles an hour is a very noisy thing. It was clear that it was totally out of control, and then I looked and it wasn't, because it was being driven. I think he's out of control. He's going to go over here. I had such an admiration for this man. He'd driven that tractor so brilliantly at clearly the cost of his own life or severe injury to save the lives of others. And I wanted to be with him. And so I was calling the men. I said, "Men, come with me." And we went down the path. And I called to Pam as we went past to say, send them into lunch, to get everybody out of the way and not interfering, really. And when I got down to the path, down to the beach, I was horrified because it was packed with people. I was just running between them, jumping between them. And I thought, oh God, there's going to be such a slaughter. It's not just one man. We're going to have many dead and injured here. And I ran down, and there at the chalet, I saw people totally stationary, mouths wide open. I knew we were there. And there was the tractor. It had hit a car. It has completely squashed the car. The tractor diesel was still running. And I looked to the people, I said, "Where is he?" And they said, "Who?" I said, "The driver." And they said, "There wasn't a driver." I said, "Oh yes, there was. I saw him. Where is he?" And I looked up the slope where the tractor had clearly come down. There was an oak tree which in the wind was horizontal, and it had broken it totally in two. And I thought he must have been thrown off when the tractor hit the oak tree. And so I looked around and I said, "Can you see him, anybody?" I said, there's nobody there. I didn't believe them, and so I started to climb through the brambles and the rough, and scratch to pieces in my shorts on my legs. And eventually they said, he's not there, there wasn't anybody.
I felt certain that the driver must be dead. And when Ray returned with the other men, when we were having our lunch, I drew him on one side and I said, he is dead, isn't he? And he said, who? And I said, the driver. And he said, there was no driver. And I said, yes, there was. And then I described exactly what I'd seen. And then suddenly, to my great relief, he said, it's all right. It's all right, he said, I saw him too.
Yes, and I did. So clearly, we both saw him. And there were others, not everybody, I think, but a number saw this man. But that tractor, the path it took was not a random path. It was a controlled path. And that one can't overcome. I'm a scientist, and that could not have happened by random. And I saw him.
My mother was extremely ill. She'd fought pneumonia for 3 months, but finally she was taken into hospital, and I knew that she wasn't going to carry on. She wasn't going to live. And I was very depressed about it. I woke up one night because the room was full of light. And I thought at first it must be a car outside. So I got out of bed and looked out of the window. Nothing. But the room was still full of light. I got back in bed, lay down, closed my eyes, and I could still see the light in my eyes. I must have gone back to sleep after that experience, feeling a bit confused. But the next morning when I woke up, I was singing a song that I hadn't sung since I was a girl, and it was Guardian Angel from Heaven So Bright, watching beside me to lead me aright. Fold thy wings round me and guard me with love, softly sing songs to me of heaven above. I hadn't sung it since I was about 12 years old, and it was on my lips all day. I just connected the two, and I rang my Auntie Frances, that's my mum's sister, and told her of this experience. And she said, oh, that was strange. I was obviously visiting my mum as often as I could in hospital. And 2 days later, the coincidence carried on because we got a letter from Australia from my mum's family. And in the letter were 2 cards. One was for my mum, and one was for my auntie. And these cards just said on the front, a guardian angel to watch over you. And in the cards were little tiny gold pins. So I knew then, the light, the song, and the letter from Australia, it was a message to say that there was an angel watching over us all.
I was sitting down with a group of other folk in this room, and we had gathered together to interview a minister, a prospective minister for our church. And we had all been asking him various questions, of course, and for a time I wasn't sure whether he was, whether it was the right one. Before he left, we were all praying together. And as I was praying, these wings, I'm sure were angels' wings, covering the whole of the room. And they were just so beautiful. And I felt that this was God's sign for us, that he was the right man to choose.
I was driving from Stafford to Wolverhampton to visit in-laws. And I hadn't driven the car for quite a while because I'd got young children and there wasn't an opportunity. We only had one car at that time, so my husband tended to use it more than me. And we'd gone a couple of miles and my husband said, I think you ought to have a drive, Sandra, so that you have a bit of a practice because it's been a long time since you've driven. And I said, oh, all right then. So he stopped the car, and as I moved from the passenger seat into the driver's seat, I said to the Lord, please will you help me to drive this car safely? I've got the children in the back, I feel a bit rusty about this, and just help me, it's quite a busy road. And at that point, as I said that, I was just suddenly aware that standing at the side of the car was this ginormous angel, about 7 feet tall, very, very tall, and a sword, and a very long garment, right down to his feet. I couldn't see his feet, and to the neck, so a very long garment. But the interesting thing for me wasn't so much that he was standing there, it was as we moved. As I'm going along this road at 40, 45 miles an hour, I knew that he was standing still. And that I didn't understand at all. But I knew that somehow that was true, that he could watch me and protect me and look after me without moving.
I think today in the world there are far more sightings of angels. Certainly there are far more people talking about sightings of angels. It's hard to know whether angels have appeared in such numbers all the time and people have kept them to themselves, or whether the climate is right for people to talk about them. I think Americans are discussing it far more because as a nation they are less inhibited and the reports are coming from America. I think people are talking quite openly about near-death experiences, and this has opened the way for people to say, yes, I've seen an angel, and may not be laughed at. I think also the millennium is approaching, and it is a well-known fact that people worry about the future. And I think there's a very great fear attached to a new century. And it's very interesting that the last resurgence in angels and angel interest was in Victorian times. I think also this century has been a very scientific century. There's been tremendous strides in the field of science and technology. And people have been looking to science to explain everything and for an answer to everything. And that has left a spiritual vacuum. And I think today people are realising that, you know, science is wonderful, but it doesn't have the answer to everything.
My angel experience happened about 6 years ago. At the beginning of the year, we were in a house in Great Baddow where my husband was a curate at the church, and he was going off on a conference within a few days, and we'd had storms and hurricanes around, and the back gates had been blown down that keep our garden separate from a public footpath that goes along the edge of the churchyard at St. Baddow. And I was a few months pregnant with our second child and was particularly aware of our vulnerability with my husband going away, and our little garden was completely open to anyone who could just wander in off the churchyard. That night, the first night my husband was away, I was praying with my daughter and put her to bed as normal, and when it came to my turn to go to bed, I was really very scared of being alone, and in my prayers I asked Jesus to keep us safe while he was away, and I was aware of 2 angels who were standing on the gatepost, absolutely brilliantly gold and light. I was aware that the angel was probably between 7 or 10 feet tall, larger than life, standing on the gatepost. I couldn't distinguish any features really. It was almost too bright to see.
I think that there are many times when angels appear, and when people recognise that, then it's a great blessing to them, a great encouragement. Sometimes it's specific and they know that there's a particular message that's being explained to them, and other times it's a general encouragement, knowing God's with them and knowing God's blessing what they're doing, and that's an equally exciting encouragement.
The very last time that Roy was given communion by the pastor of our church, Jim Graham, in the middle of the little service that he was giving, suddenly Roy sat up and said, "Jim, he's here. Can you see him? I can see Jesus, and he's standing in the doorway of the bedroom." Well, we both looked because we wanted to see Jesus too. We couldn't see him, but we were very aware of that presence at that time. It was a very special moment for all of us.
I think angels have always been here and always will be here. I think angels are around everybody all the time. I think it's just a different dimension. It's almost like radio waves. When you open and you attune, they're there for you. And if we could do that all the time, I think we'd see angels all the time. But I think they're here to stay, definitely.